administration. We're so glad you could join us tonight. I'm going to share a brief run of show, and then we'll get started. As you may have noticed when you walked in, there are question cards on the seats. If there's a question you'd like to ask the congressman, please fill out the question card, and we will get to as many questions as possible. As you might have guessed, given the number of people in attendance tonight and the number of questions we've already received online, we will not get to every question. But, and this is an important piece of information, if you complete your question card fully with your contact information and legibly, we need to be able to read it, we'll respond to your question after the town hall. If you have a complete question card, please feel free to raise it in the air, and one of my colleagues, we're all dressed in black today, and we have our name tags on, will come collect it. Man, you guys have a lot of questions. Wonderful. So in a few minutes, the congressman will share a presentation and provide an update from Washington, D.C. But first, we have several elected officials in the audience tonight, including the entire Walnut Creek City Council. Led by Mayor Cindy Darling, Mayor Pro Tem Kevin Wilk, Council members Matt Francois, Cindy Silva, and Craig DeVinny. And we're also pleased to have Valerie Barone, City Manager for the City of Concord, with us tonight. And now I'll turn it over to the Mayor of Walnut Creek, Cindy Darling, to welcome you to this wonderful city and introduce the Congressman.
Thank you guys so much. I'm Cindy Darling, the Mayor of Walnut Creek, and I wanted to welcome you to tonight's town hall on preparing for the second Trump presidency. By the overflow crowd we have tonight, I can see how important this is to our community. So, back in November, the only strategy I had on preparing for a Trump comeback was a combination of chocolate and alcohol. Put them together, and that worked really well for a while. It's not a long-term strategy that really is going to work. So when I was sworn in as mayor in December, my strategy evolved a bit. I'm sure I speak from all of my fellow council members who are here tonight when I say that we are standing behind our city mission. Our mission statement says that we are here to create a positive environment where all people can live, work, and play, a vibrant local economy to enhance and sustain long-term fiscal stability for all, and a progressive workforce with dedicated employees who can make a difference. I mean, we are stronger when we recognize and value the diversity of the human experience. So I'm standing behind this strategy, but I am sure I speak for many of us when I say the last 10 days have been a bit much. And so that's why I'm really happy tonight to introduce somebody I regularly turn to in challenging times like these, because he gets it. He understands the value of diversity. He understands the strength of California. And so let's all give a big, happy welcome to the man with the big job this year, our great Congressman Mark DeSaulnier.
God, it's good to be home. Well, first of all, I want to thank the City Council, all of you. In particular, you've been great to work with. It's a wonderful city. I want to thank the police department as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for what you do. Let's give them that. Just before I came over here, I was reading a column by David Brooks, one of my favorite conservative Republicans. One of the great joys of my job is be able to have conversations with him. You've got to read it. I think the headline is 6 Degrees of Stupidity. And in there he quotes Bonhoeffer, which, if you know Richard Bonhoeffer's story, a martyr of World War II, a great theologian, but he quotes Bonhoeffer, "Against stupidity, we are defenseless." We're not. It's the first time I've ever disagreed with Richard Bonhoeffer. We are in difficult times, but we've got to stay focused. We've just got to stay focused and use the tools that we have. So I'm going to go through, how many of you have been to one of our town halls before? Now look at this, frequent flyers, you get extra bonus points. They're not worth anything, but so you know the drill. I'm going to go through this. It's particularly dense because, as you can imagine, both the DC office and our office has been very busy the last 10 days, emotionally and otherwise. So it's dense. So as I always say, I'm going to go through it. If I go too quickly, it's on our social media. We're doing this on Facebook and on Zoom. So for the people at home, it'll stay on our social media and our website, and you can go back and look at it. So there's a lot of content in here, and I apologize, but we want to get the conversation part of it. One more thing before I go to the thing is we had an emergency Democratic caucus call yesterday. We were prepared for this. That's what I want to tell you. I mean, even the last 10 days, that litigation that is holding it up right now so we can get a proper review. We're going to be in the courts a lot, and we're ready for that. And we've got a network and a partnership. I know, you know, Will Rogers, I'm not a member of an organized political party. I'm a Democrat. I walk around the floor sometimes in front of my Republican friends, too. I say, Will Rogers. But thanks to my friend and neighbor, Nancy Pelosi, we have an infrastructure that the current leadership, Hakeem Jeffries from New York, Catherine Clark from Massachusetts, and Pete Aguilar from Redlands, we created an infrastructure not just within the political world, but within the nonprofits. And one of the things we want to be prepared for is to work with all of the jurisdictions, and we're doing that to reach out to nonprofits because of the last 7 days, to reach out to school districts, to healthcare facilities. I met with the head of the Contra Costa Health Department today and her team in preparation for what we anticipated of this administration. So we're working together, school districts, special districts, county, everybody, to be prepared. And one of the things is really hard in this environment is not to overreact to everything. The fight-flight mechanisms, a lot of these people know what they're doing. They're using social media in a very sophisticated way that you've heard me talk about. I can recommend a bunch of books, Chaos Machine, Dopamine Nation, Who's Minding Our Kids, Big Tech, all really brilliant researchers. And we're learning more and more about how what we've learned about neuroscience, and UCSF is next to Johns Hopkins, is the 2 best places in the country. What we're learning about how this works is we've learned more in the last 50 years about the chemical and the biological aspect of how our brain works, largely because of American taxpayers, than we did in all the other thousands of years of human evolution. So a lot of the emotion, the fight-flight mechanisms, unfortunately, it takes a while for the community and the politics, particularly in a democracy, but it's better that way, to respond to these new technologies. It's happened over and over again. Another great book is The Age of Acrimony. It's a story about a similar time in our history right after World War II. The gentleman who wrote it is the Smithsonian's historian on Congress. And basically, his analogy, the telegraph was the same kind of technology when the Industrial Revolution was happening. So we had At least we don't have duels in Congress anymore. But multiple duels. I'm mad at you. Let's be manly and go out and shoot at each other. But we do evolve. But we've been through this pattern before. Another couple books, The Four Turnings, and the fourth turning in here is a statistical historian and his partner looking at, before this happened, the probability of these cycles we're in. And they tie them to Jungian archetypes, so psychological archetypes. And it sort of makes sense, you know, after war, the first 25 years, and they're generational, they write about generational personalities. The first 25 years is the awakening, when people just get sick of war, chaos, and they start trying to figure out how we work out together. Second one is prosperity. That's like post-World War II, the 50s, 60s. We got along. Eisenhower, one of the great nonpartisan Republicans, he had a great quote. He said, I love doing this in the Labor Committee with my Republican colleagues. Remember what Eisenhower said? Only a fool would try to come between an American worker and organizing. I take great pleasure in saying that over. Virginia Fox, who's a friend I've talked about, was the chair. She goes, I wish you'd stop saying that. That's why I keep saying it. Virginia is just irritating. The third is unraveling. And people start to forget, the generations forget about what the generations, and the last part is crisis. They predicted statistically, it's pretty compelling, it's dense, that this crisis will come to its cathartic moments between 2025 and 2030. When I met with Neil Howe, the author, he went through this whole thing, and I said, you know, I've always been pretty stoical. I'm old, I've been sick, I got other things I want to do in my life. He goes, no, stop. It depends how bad it is. And people have to have other people who focus and realize we're overreacting to things, but it's not the overreaction, I would say, it's the focus. And think of family relations or personal relations. We get excited. Our dopamine gets fired up, our adrenaline. The police officers know this. They get trained on this, how to de-escalate. Your brain starts to de-escalate. The reason why we say take a deep breath is because it chemically gets you to start slow down. Your fight-flight mechanism goes, okay, I've gotten away from that tiger in the bush. Now what do I do to make sure I don't do it again and make sure he doesn't find me? So sorry for the digression, but I'm here as a political therapist, but also as a client. All right, let's run through this. Oh, the clicker. They don't let me operate technical things. All right, so this is our new district. You know we do redistricting. We're required to do that nationally, based largely on population, but in some court orders based on ethnicity. The old district was from Richmond all the way to downtown Antioch, and then it didn't have San Ramon and Dublin. So the Redistricting Commission, which we approved 20 years ago, has criteria, and they shifted it south to San Ramon and half of Dublin, and then east for almost all of eastern Contra Costa County. The little swig out there is Discovery Bay that is in Congressman Harder's district. The 80 corridor now is all in John Garmendi's district. Next. So this is where it gets busier. And all right, Mark, you gotta be smarter than the microphone. So this is just, we got a lot done in the first 2 years we were together. I thought President Biden did a remarkable job. A lot of my Republican colleagues agreed, and on some of these bills, they actually voted for it. Not many of them, and I'll say why and the problems with independent expenditures. But in particular interest, I had a lot to do with these. The $1 trillion investment in repairs and roads. As you all know, I've been involved in transportation for years. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority when I was a city council member, since the city manager of Concord's over there. I was on other things too. I won't talk about TransPAC. That's a sub-regional part of the process. And they're all great. And then, let's see, that and county supervisor. And then when I went to the legislature, I was pleased to be asked by the then Assembly Speaker and the now Mayor of Los Angeles called me in their office. I thought I was in trouble. They said, we need somebody to chair Assembly Transportation. You clearly know more than most people. So I have this little footnote in history. I was the first freshman legislator to chair the Transportation Committee in either houses. So that was nice. I did that for 2 years, and then I replaced Don Torlakson in the Senate, where I chaired the Labor Committee for 2 years, and then Transportation Infrastructure 4 years. When I went to Congress, Speaker Pelosi put me on the Transportation Committee and the Education and Labor Committee. So this was a real accomplishment. Speaking of Eisenhower, it's the largest investment in America's infrastructure since President Eisenhower. Multiple presidents have tried to do this. For every one job that creates, it creates 14 other ones. For small businesses, it's a big multiplier. So I was aware of that as a former small business owner. I followed disposable income for a long time, because that's going out to dinner is one of the first things the economists tell you people cut back on. So you have to anticipate these things. It's one of our challenges in this country when we try to measure what's important to people. And your 5 fixed cost, healthcare, housing, transportation, education, taxes, they have increased nationally well beyond inflation. The rest of what's left over, because you have to pay those to some degree, is your disposable income. And because of my previous career, I was keenly aware of if people didn't have money, they didn't go out to eat. A canary in the coal mine. The Clean Corridors Act is something I started I was appointed by 3 governors, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, to something called a California Resources Board. It set federal standards. The current president has tried to break what's called the California waiver. It was written by Richard Nixon. It set the U.S. Clean Air Act. He also signed the Clean Water Act. Remarkable, probably 2 of the best environmental laws. So in context, signed by the Republican Party. And then the governor of California who signed the California Clean Act was Ronald Reagan. I also love bringing this up to my colleagues too, because they don't like either one of them. But one of the things that Nixon insisted on with Reagan was the California waiver, which allows California and CARB, based on findings that can be litigated, to pass air pollution laws that exceed the national standards. And then other states can petition EPA through the waiver to come up, but you have to have findings that are challengeable in court. It's never been denied in the history of this country. It almost was denied by why can't I say his name? The last time the current president was president. So in this area, we're right at the top of the country. We're putting, the Contra Costa Transportation Authority is doing a great job in the 680 corridor, in the 80 corridor, because we are the home, the car companies tell us, to early adopters. We sell more EVs and fuel cell cars because for market change, they know that the #1 place for people to be open to change, strangely enough, is California. And I was on CARB. I went to Detroit multiple times. Japan I went multiple times. And I negotiated credits. It was really a great job. But they know where the market is. So we're trying to put the infrastructure where the cars are. So it's really exciting for us. And the public health benefits are very measurable. So, but if people don't agree with it, including the current administration, they will go to court. So we're going to have to prevail. And ultimately, if it goes to the Supreme Court, they are predominantly Republican, more conservative appointees, but that's the system we work in. CHIPS and Science Act is also important to us. As you probably read, we were losing the chip divide. Most chips outside of mainland China were produced in Taiwan, so this was important. We're building big, with companies like Intel, big factories in the Midwest, which is a little disappointing that we didn't express the things that we're doing there right now. And also a lot of the battery electric plants are also in states that didn't vote for us and traditionally don't. So something's wrong with our messaging that we have to figure out, and I have some opinions, but it's not always wise for me to express myself, even in my own party. My opinions are now always appreciated. So next, but that's a big thing for us because it helps the 3 national labs that we have in the East Bay. Berkeley, Ernest Lawrence, the person who basically created the national laboratories, and Lawrence Livermore, named after Ernest Lawrence. Ernest Lawrence was a professor at Berkeley, and he's a genius. I'll give you another book, Big Science, great book about him. So deficits, this is just the facts. I always like to put where we get this from, so if people question where we get the information, since there's so much information in politics, misinformation, and you can go to these sites and look at them, but the Congressional Budget Office is historically nonpartisan. It's by rule and statute supposed to be nonpartisan, and historically has been. Unfortunately, with some of the current nominees for a lot of these departments, we're worried about it not being as fact-based, analytical. So I think a balanced budget is important, but it's also, there are times when you have to put money in. So knowing when to do it and when not to be anticipatory of inflation or depression or what it does to local business or disposable income is an economic art more than a science, although the science helps us a lot. All right, we have done a lot of good bipartisan stuff that I've been here. You never read about it because it doesn't sell advertising, quite frankly. And it's really sort of, it's very depressing. It's hard. I think most of us here are in politics, if I may say so, because we like to problem solve and serve the community, and that requires compromise because our perspective is, strangely enough, not always right. And I, like my friend Virginia, I said, I can't get elected in your district in North Carolina. You couldn't get elected in my district in Northern California, but that's the way it works. So let's figure out how you represent your constituents who believe in you, and you reflect that, and I do, and be respectful of one another, and figure out where we have a commonality for both of them. So we have done a lot of that. Criminal justice reform is interesting. A lot of that was done in judiciary, but in oversight when I first got there. I had just come off of being involved in criminal reduction reform in the legislature. I chaired their budget subcommittee, and the Supreme Court told us we had to take 50,000 inmates out of the California Correctional Department, and we weren't prepared for that, even though we knew it was awful when you went to those prisons, the way people were out at Dual, not far from here, triple, quadruple stacks in what used to be a community yard, 300-400 people. They were let out for an hour a day. So, you know, it was worse than that. That facility in the 50s was a national showcase. The joke the warden told me, he says, you know, when we started this thing, we had all these career track programs, and over the years, the wardens would always say about people writing and saying, how do I get in there? I said, so did they get a letter from the warden and say, well, you'll have to go out and commit a crime and get adjudicated here? I don't think he thought that was funny, but. And veterans, let's see, opioids, I was very involved with that. It was my request when I was on oversight, when we were in charge, the oversight committee, to tell the Sackler family we wanted them to come and testify. They hired attorneys, said we're not coming. So if you know the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma, just a horrible, horrible story. So they came, we threatened to subpoena them, they came. You read in the paper that the attorney generals across the United States are still trying to work out a settlement in the billions. I personally think people should hold executives for what they did criminally accountable. I mean, it's almost unspeakable what they did. There's great writing on this as well. I'm trying to remember the books, but they targeted West Virginia, Ohio, because they knew where people were working hard. And they targeted a couple of pharmacies in West Virginia. They just overloaded it, and they basically gave kickbacks to pharmacies, and they were sales promotions, and the doctors, and they addicted people, and it's just awful. I had a constituent in San Ramon who brought it to my attention. Her son, years ago, she came to one of these. She said, I want to talk to you. My son was a freshman at Arizona State a few months ago, and a bunch of his buddies said, we're going to drive to LA and have some fun this weekend. They drove, they went to a pill doctor, who is now in state prison, by the way. They got Oxycontin, and on the drive back, he overdosed. He was like 19 years old, brilliant young kid. There was an incident in Blackhawk where a woman who was on Oxycontin, maybe some of you remember this, she swerved and hit a family that were walking on the side of the road. Dave Pack became friends. He came to me. He became a national leader on this. His wife was pregnant at the time, and one of the pregnant kids died, and she almost died. It was a miracle she lived. So there were multiple stories about this. I told you I was going to go quickly, so I better start. But on the opioids, that was another thing where we called them on account, and we have made changes to make sure that it's fixed. There's much more accountability in the Senate. The then Attorney General and I got a lot of press because we worked together because I had her budget. And we created the CURES system, the first system in the country, where in real time, the Department of Justice, the Health Department, state, an individual pharmacist, and a doctor's office were all tracked for who they were doing opioids to, how frequently, so we could follow in real time, and it gave the evidence to the Department of Justice to go after the real bad people. It has been a struggle because there are people who need painkillers, and sometimes they don't get enough. So balancing this, the greed has made it more difficult on a number of levels. But all of those things, gun violence reform by our standards, what we got out of the Senate, what we passed, it doesn't come close to what we do in California. Giffords, if you go to their website, they do a remarkable job of state by state connecting gun violence as a public health issue, policy to reduction. And it's pretty hard to refute, but people still do. Gabby Giffords, years ago, I got a grant to go to Harvard Kennedy School, and there were four of us, and she was one of them from local government. She was a state senator then. We became good friends, and we're still friends. Just horrible what happened to her. So on the gun violence stuff, we do a remarkable job in Contra Costa. Contra Costa has been, so I've been talking to Giffords a lot about, can you take your numbers and start aggregating them county by county? So we can make the argument, we're not taking try any guns away. We'll follow the constitutional rules, we have to. Supreme Court said we have to. But let's do evidence-based research, and even if you don't do it by law, try to incentivize people to be aware of these practices that help people make wiser decisions. That's what we did with tobacco, is just let people know that if you use this product, these are the things that could happen based on the research and direct on the research. And it's amazing how much that works. Packaging in grocery stores. And just as a side, most of the people who make the decisions and actually read that packaging are members of which gender, do you think? Yeah, I hear all you women laughing. You know the answer to the question. And they're the decision makers, thank God. Yeah, I see you, Cindy. Okay. So those are just some more. The last one is really important. We've been trying to do this for years. Senator Feinstein was a cause for her. So like teachers, why don't they get Social Security? So this is the first attempt since the 40s to adjust that. All right, so this is what we've been responding to. We're just got to be prepared. This is particularly awful. Having spent a lot of time with them because of my cancer and my health, it's a national treasure. The Chinese are replicating it right now. But the National Institute for Health in Bethesda and the American Cancer Institute's behind it. Again, historically, it's been very, very bipartisan. When he was president last time, I had started a cancer caucus. It's completely bipartisan. He suggested in his first budget he was going to cut the Cancer Institute's budget by $7 billion. My Republican colleagues, we talked about it, and they said, no, if you submit this to us, we're going to reject it. So we actually put more money back in, collectively, bipartisan. And the return on investment for this is astronomical. I mean, it's just, I have pills in my pocket that keep me alive because of my cancer. Most of it was developed at the Department of Defense after World War I to now. When I started taking them, it was $500, $400 a day. The Wall Street Journal, multiple papers did stories about upper middle income people who had health insurance who couldn't afford the copay, so they had to decide, don't want to stay alive? I mean, literally. We had hearings on this too. I got the chairman of Johnson & Johnson to come. They have my pill. That pill was $400 or $500 a day, and Medicare and Medi-Cal had to pay for that. In Australia, it was $37 a day. In the EU, it was $90. What they basically told me is when I met with them, why do you pay us so much? We paid for most of the, and basically it was, well, this is our business model internationally, and you're the people who let us do it. So one of the big accomplishments that this might undo, but I don't think he'll do it because my Republican Party colleagues don't believe in it. 5 of the first drugs that we got renegotiated, another accomplishment of the Biden administration, was the drug I have. It was focused on dialysis, so all of those have come down. Mine now is about $85 a day. So the profit margin, you know, basically the answer from the industry was, the reason why we do it in America is because you let us. And it's subsidized. This is what made me mad. You're subsidizing other countries. We are subsidizing other countries. All right. So all of these things, we're sort of in a position why we're prepared. I don't think any of us were prepared like you emotionally for the chaos, even though we've been this before. So we're trying to work with people on the other side, to work with the administration to go, but we're going to work with them, but we can't work with them, we're going to fight like hell because the consequences are too high. So these are more, the 1,500 were really hard. I was one of the last members evacuated from the Capitol building on January 6th. My doctors didn't want to be there because I was still recovering from 5 weeks on a ventilator at George Washington from a freak fall where I'd broken my ribs, and then 10 days later I had full-blown pneumonia. It was the first day of, it was the day California initiated the policy for COVID where we shut down and tried to protect people. So Speaker Pelosi said we only had 3 votes at that time, Democratic majority. She said we can't count, and I tried to work with Kevin McCarthy and his folks. You know, my doctors don't want me there. Can we figure something out here? And basically the answer was no. If you're not here, you can't vote because you have to be, the Constitution says you physically have to be there to vote when you get sworn in. So I went back, but they isolated me in a room. And I'll tell you, that experience, it'll never leave any of us. It's hard to describe being there. It's hard not to get emotional. But that, on January 3rd this year, I spent time by myself in the Capitol. On January 6th, I kept time with myself in the Capitol. I mean, I came back, the chief of the Capitol Police with a bunch of police officers came back to get me and a few other people. And as we came around the corridor outside the chambers, a reporter was screaming hysterically, "What am I supposed to do? Save me." And one of the police officers just said, "Sorry, we'll come back when we can." It was more emotive than that. So when we went back to where the Capitol Police all had assault weapons at that point, we were all put in a safe room, Republicans and Democrats. But walking by those police officers, And a lot of them are friends, and they've retired now, so we still talk about it. So that in particular, I'm sorry, that was awful. All right, so this, since you've come a lot, you've heard, yes, isn't, I'm sorry, when they say a picture says 1,000 words, you can't see him, but a very good friend of mine is right behind Mr. Zuckerberg, John Ratcliffe, who is a good friend, very conservative, former prosecutor. I think he was appointed by George W. Bush out of Dallas, and he just got confirmed for the CIA director. So I'm about to send him a note and say, John, you went to Notre Dame. You know, remember, for us who went to Catholic colleges, we're supposed to, and everybody, fine, I'm glad you're there, but, so I always bring this up. If you've read Thomas Piketty, Piketty in particular, it's a really hard read, but it's just a historical fact. When we get in this level of inequality between us in economics, there's always problems. I mean, Piketty's book, Capital, it's very tedious to read because he knew he was going to be criticized, but it's very hard to argue because he went, and it's not just the United States, it's all the developed world over hundreds of years. So the war, that was 10 years ago when he came out. You can't have this level of inequality and lack of opportunity for everybody without some kind of social implosion. And unfortunately, we haven't articulated. I thought Bernie articulated it well. I don't think we've articulated it well. And one of the things is when you bring this up, people say, oh, you're doing class warfare. This is evidence-based research. So let's argue about it that way. And if you're right, the facts can help illustrate that. But just, you're against us. Well, my response at one of these years ago, it's not class warfare when the war's over. You've won. But look what you've done to this country. So Lincoln famously said, wages and capital must always be, he called it labor. Labor and capital must always be balanced in America. And if they're not balanced, it's fine to make a return on profit, but people have to make a wage they can live on as well. And if you can get investments, great. That fuels the economy. But when they get out of balance, Lincoln said, then you have no democracy. We have a Brandeis quote. Well, there it is. Brandeis was awesome. So I promised you I'd go quickly, but I'm being too talky. I haven't had a town hall for a while, and I've been sick, so I'm taking it all out on you. So this is another one. This is from the government budget office, just explaining from 1980. I wish we were trying to get one that goes back further, because when you get to the 50s, it's really a flat line. And by the way, the American economy grew at historical rates when it was balanced. To be fair, we didn't have a lot of competition because the industrialized countries had all been bombed, and we had the advantage of not being. Let's see, next. So total family wealth. And I wanted to point this out because Citizens United on a 5-4 vote, it just created this slush fund, and we both do it now, but it's wrong. Before that, when you did campaign contributions, and we were getting better at it at every level, just provide transparency. Who do you get your funding from for your campaigns, right? And then you can read it, and you can figure out, well, something's up here. It's too quid pro quo, it's too pay to play, or you're okay with it. That last graph hides all that because the Supreme Court said that independent expenditures are protected under the free speech clause of the United States, which nobody said that before, no court said that prior. And it was part of the Koch network, a lot of good writing on this. Jane Mayer, you've all heard me talk about her work in Dark Money and other things. It just fueled this. I mean, I know members of Congress, I know a Republican member I really like who's now retired from outside of Philadelphia. And I said, why are you leaving? You're great to work with. You've got a history of being great on conservative issues. He said, Mark, I've got $1 million in my campaign account. It used to be enough that I could defend my record with that against a well-funded. These guys can spend $20 million, and no one will know it until after the election on TV in Philadelphia that gets out to my rural community, and they'll define me in a way that not only will I lose, but I can't go back to my community because they'll all think what a horrible human being I am. So it was done. We do this a lot in politics. It's not like I'm trying to be naive, but this has made it much worse, and it's fed into the social media and media complex. It all pays for itself. Next. So again, this goes back to 90, but you can just see how this has gone up. We should aggregate this by which party, because the Democrats do it too, and we've been catching up, which I'm not a fan of. But unilateral disarmament doesn't work too well either. So we had a bill, SB 1, that we ran 3-4 times, and when we were in charge too. It passed out of this House. John Sarbanes, a wonderful member, a friend. He came out here a couple times. We talked at the University of California and Stanford about it. It just would create everything we could do statutorily under the guidance of what our lawyers thought we could do, so the Supreme Court wouldn't overturn. And it was just about more transparency. Didn't say you couldn't do it. You just got to report more quickly and more honestly, and you have to identify. One of the things we did in California about this, which was great, is the largest, and you all voted, well, the majority voted for it, the largest contributors over a certain amount have to put an ID, like their logo on it. And it really works. I mean, you probably have noticed, you get a mailer, and it will say, as required by the state election commission, that's not the right name, but I'm facing on it, that these are the 3 major contributors. So it'll say PG&E, and you'll go, why does PG&E want this? And then they have to answer for it. Might be a good reason. Next. This is my favorite Piketty chart that just illustrates the problem. The red line is wages and benefits since 1950, and this is capital as a percentage of GDP. I call this the Jaws, and this just, it's a little old, it's 2020, but it's gotten worse since then. So if your kids can't find housing, this is part of what's contributed to it. Again, I'm not saying, I'm not a socialist, I believe, I'm a capitalist, I'm a former restaurant owner. I believe in individual hard work and merit and accomplishment and accomplishing wealth. But it's out of balance, wildly out of balance. All right. So the oversight of the federal agencies, this was something else he did. The inspector generals are one of the great things that we have in Congress. We've had great hearings. He fired all of them. We're again litigating that because the law says he has that ability, but again, he has to reason to do it, and he has to notify us first. He didn't do either of those things. And some of these people he appointed. So you can imagine who he's going to try to replace them with. Inspector generals are like the controller here. They're the legislative analyst office. The legislative analyst office in Sacramento, they have to be hired, the LAO, by consensus of the leaders of both parties. And they also have to be completely nonpartisan. Now, people will argue about that, but they work because you get the facts by it. I mean, we all want to know that. When we want to buy a car, we want to see what Consumers Digest says if we're smart, or if we have doubts. So we have to, that's a big thing, is getting good inspector generals and insisting on it. That's something you haven't read about as much that I think potentially is much more damaging than some of the other things that he's done in the next 4 years. So, yeah, we'll continue to, as I said, we'll continue to find opportunities, and I know we will with our colleagues. Some of them have come to me, and a couple of them on the floor and just said, listen, I still want to work with you. And I'm like, well, you need 60 votes in the Senate still for most stuff. The next big thing is reconciliation and how much they'll put in that. If you know about reconciliation, you only need 51 votes in the Senate if it's based on the budget. And the parliamentarian in the Senate is the decider of that. She's like the LAO in Sacramento that I just described. She's historically, she is right now, but historically they're very by the book. And it'll be interesting to see how she gets tested. So that's where our district offices are. Have I now used up the whole time? Almost. Geez, come on. We'll stay later if Walnut Creek will let us. We'll pay the going rate, but don't try to gougers here. You're not looking at Tiffany's.
Thank you, Congressman. Now we're going to head, yes. Now we're going to head into the question and answer section. So this is another reminder, if you have a question card, please raise it high in the air, and one of my colleagues will come get it. We already have a lot of question cards up here, so thank you for your overwhelming response. As I said earlier, there's no way we're going to get through all of these, but if you've included your contact information, we will send a response to you. And let's get started. Okay, boss. We are. We decided we're going to do something fun and different today. It's our first town hall try, so you'll have to give us some feedback on how it goes.
I hate to admit this, but one of the trolls that follows us says these are all rigged, so.
So the congressman is going to start out by picking
They haven't been, by the way.
the first question at random.
No, it's from my mother. No. I like this crowd.
All right, we have a question from Carolyn, who's from Martinez. She says, how are you going to protect gay rights? How are you going to stop Trump from overturning gay marriage? The Supreme Court seems to do whatever he wants.
Well, that applies to many things. As somebody, Contra Costa also has a long history in this regard. The first time I ran for office in Concord, we had an initiative. The city council in the 80s passed an HIV anti-discrimination law, and it became sort of a national thing. It actually got approved, unfortunately, by the voters, and then it was thrown out by the courts because it was unconstitutional, because it was discriminatory. But out of that became a really strong community to protect people who, in the LGBT community, and it's been largely nonpartisan in this community, and very effective. So we're going to have to rely on the courts and public opinion, frankly. One of my best friends is the chair of the LGBTQ caucus, Mark Pocan from Madison, outside of Madison, Wisconsin. He went into politics because he came out of a restaurant in Madison right after he got out of college, and some people picked him up and beat him up and left by the side of the road outside of town. And when he was found and recovered, he decided to run for the legislature, and he's been in Congress for a long time. So we just have to remember we have to be focused and effective, and we've got to work with people, but when we don't, we're going to have to fight. And a lot of that's going to be through the courts, and we know, depending on where the cases are filed, we will have a challenge. And as you said, the Supreme Court, I've read a quote by about impoundment. Justice Scalia, of all people, said, this is a great quote, in his decision, Richard Nixon wanted to do what the current presidents want to do. And Scalia, if you know him, one of the most conservative, but also very brilliant, his quote was in the dissent, Richard Nixon, the Mahatma Gandhi of impoundment. And then he went on in technical terms about why he had overreached. So it's not being used legally, and we're going to have to defend it. And similarly, for Roe v. Wade, for those accesses, which we've done a good job in California. But this is going to be tough. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat the challenge, but a lot of, again, is going to be in court for 2 years.
All right, we have a question from Leslie from Concord. She asks, what can Congress do if the president refuses to comply with court orders to follow the law?
There you go. I mean, these are constitutional challenges. For all the dark times we've had, we haven't, since the Civil War. I was interviewed on January 6th by Judy Woodruff, and I was sick and I was overwhelmed, and she said, well, has there ever been anything like this? I said, yeah, Civil War. And I don't mean to be Pollyannish, but your question reflects the challenge we have. I mean, for most of us, when have we ever seen anything like this? Never. I mean, you know who the U.S. Senator was who drove down to the White House and told Richard Nixon he had to resign or he'd be impeached? Barry Goldwater. mean, you can't argue with Barry Goldwater's credentials for being a conservative. This is a different time we're living in. So we're going to have to use logic. And I'm always, you know, I tell my colleagues, I said, can't we just have two functioning parties? A right of center party and a left of center party. Works for everybody. And then we can argue around the match. And, you know, a lot of these people have become friends. And it's difficult. I'll tell you, a couple of them on January 6th, I had conversations with, and I said, I don't understand how you could vote not to certify the election after what you just went through, what we went through. And I refer to it as the looking at your shoes conversation, where they'll go like this, and you go, you don't understand my district. And I said, well, help explain it to me. Anyways.
That is a great segue, boss, to a question from David from Danville, who asks, do you expect many Republicans in the House and Senate to reject some of Trump's most egregious plans? Are they scared to resist?
Well, the independent expenditure slide, can we go back to that? This is what they're afraid of. What I said about my colleague from Pennsylvania.
This one?
No, the next one. Send Citizens United. There. All of that, if somebody breaks ranks, they get a check for $5 million to an independent expenditure that attacks them in their district in a sophisticated way that you can't match in individual contributions. You just can't. So we're in a polarized time, but this is the reason it's so awful. In addition to the fact that social media companies, to that other picture, they're making money off of this. So those books I recommended to you, they're taking what we've learned about neuroscience, they get all your data, and the book Chaos Machine, he's a New York Times reporter who figured out that if YouTube was targeting adolescent girls, and once they found out through the algorithms they were at higher risk for overreaction and depression, this is unbelievable. The algorithms would just take them to a YouTube site that showed them how to commit suicide. And when he broke that story, they were like, oh, we're so sorry, we didn't mean to do it. BS. It's a really warped thing, because in real time, the advertising rates are tied to the algorithms. And this is true for the TV stations and now too. So we've got to figure out how we fix that so that people don't get on these things and believe it all as gospel. A lot of what you get, I mean, it's weird that technology and social media are such a benefit. Remember the Arab Spring where we thought American technology is going to sprout democracy all over the world, and then it was misused. So the story about the telegraph that I didn't finish was, when that started in this book, he showed how quickly that changed everything. And before the telegraph, in order for a local community in Kansas or California, it took weeks to find out, because it had to be physically relayed to wherever it was. With the telegraph, which went up really quickly, all of a sudden there was an explosion of newspapers, but they used the information, many of them for good, but many of them were very partisan. And it created this age of acrimony that the book is about duels and fistfights and again, inequality. So, but your question is a good one. He's going to test. He's testing already. And Justice Roberts, in particular, is going to figure out what he's going to have to do at some point, my opinion.
All right, our next question comes from Howard from Walnut Creek. Howard submitted this ahead of time, so he may not be in the audience, but may be watching online. What is the downside of DOGE and Musk's interference with the U.S. government?
Because it's arbitrary. And I was on the oversight committee. This is the Republican side of me and a small business side. I always say, if you make it more efficient, that's better for everybody. You know, I mean, just get rid of the inefficiencies, do performance-driven budgeting. I did that at the county, and it's helped. The county department heads have to, before the budget, report on specific performance. How many clients did you see? What were the outcomes? What are the historical trends? And it really helped all of us. So the idea of oversight and efficiency, I think, should be great. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go on the oversight committee, because I figured what could be more nonpartisan than that? If I used to tell, remember Mark Meadows? I said, Mark, you know, if I want to cut down taxes and use it for some other cause as a Democrat because you think I'm a socialist, then that's not mutually exclusive if you want to cut down taxes and have everybody keep it. I'm fine with people keeping it, partially because what I told you about being a small business owner, because then they've got more money to spend in the local community. This is not that. This is not based on analytics or any kind of performance standard. There's another great book called Ludicrous. I'm not trying to press you with how much I read, but I do like to read a lot. And it's a book about Elon Musk. And one of the things about those three gentlemen, they're great at marketing. That's where their genius is. There's some technical expertise. I had a meeting with Elon Musk once when I was in the legislature, and because I'd been in CARB, he wanted to talk to me, and he goes, I was down at the plant, but I also had the budget for Health and Human Services, so we're cutting billions of dollars for poor people, disabled people. So I said, well, Mr. Musk, what did you want to talk to me? He said, I want to know why in Portland I don't have to pay sales tax on my cars. And I'm like, wait. His lobbyist was hilarious because he was watching all this, and the lobbyist knew me. I said, let me get this straight. You want me to carry a bill that would say cars that cost $120,000 won't pay sales tax? And he goes, yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. My constituents would be pretty mad at that because when they're running the pothole, they're going to want to know, who's the dope who allowed this funding source to do? That is not to say that we can do a better job with our tax system everywhere.
All right, this is a related question to what you just referenced. Mark from Martinez asks, is the ADA on the chopping block?
Not that I've heard. And that would be a really bad mistake. One of the great things that have happened, and again, this county has a lot to do with this. George Miller Sr., when he was a state senator, was really a champion for disability rights. We've had a long history here. Actually, there's a great story. I'm good telling too many stories, so we're really killing you with me blabbing. There's a great story about how the ADA in California came about. Pat Brown was governor. The LA Times wrote a story about all these institutionalized physically disabled people and how they were being abused. So Pat Brown called a guy named Naylor, who was a conservative chair, a Republican from, I think, Orange County, and to his office and said, oh my God, look what the LA Times did. We're gonna have to build a lot more of these facilities. And the story is he shook his hand, the conservative Republican, he said, no. And Pat Brown, I knew you were gonna say that. How could you do these people? He said, no, we're gonna put them in the community where they belong and provide the services. Now, the federal government, since ADA was promised, I think it was 40% of the cost to provide these services after all this, and I think we've got up to 8%. So we've done a remarkable job, and here too, in particular, for people with cerebral palsy and with disabilities, which is another comment about the current president of the United States and his comments about a New York Times reporter who is disabled, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. So we're just going to have to fight. But I do think on that one, again, I'm not naive, but the DD community has sort of selected me as being their advocate, and recognized me a bunch of times, in the Labor and Education Committee has a lot of jurisdiction. So I'm pretty sure we could fight that effectively, but we're ready.
All right, boss, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. It is 7:30. Would you like to take a few more questions?
Is that all right with the landlord? I wasn't talking to you, Kevin. I was talking to your voters out there. If it's okay, I'm sorry. I really, this is good. It's complicated, and it's a test, really. This is the first one, I believe, of any member of Congress in this administration, Republican or Democrat. So.
Okay, our next question comes from Lee from Concord. What support and pushback is planned for the president's order denying funding to schools that refuse to comply with ICE, anti-trans, bigotry, and historical whitewashing?
This is going to be a big fight. So the term before I got into Congress, there was a bill, bipartisan bill, in the Senate that passed out of the Senate. John McCain was one of the Republicans, Rubio, Durbin, Schumer, and I can't remember who the other four were. It was the Gang of Eight. They knew this had to be fixed. We've got an immigration problem. No one wants open borders. There's got to be a process. So it was compromise. I think in that one, if someone was here, they had to come in and apply to have the right documentation to be able to stay. They had to have a job. They couldn't get arrested. They couldn't get in financial trouble. And if they had a good record, in 20 years, they could apply for citizenship. By the way, we need workers. I mean, the employers are crying. I mean, us French and Irish people aren't having as many kids as we used to. My mother used to say we didn't want to work as hard as her generation. So they had that. Pete Aguilar had a bill early on with, I'm spacing on his name, a wonderful former CIA Republican from the border who they took out because he worked with us. The first one, the first bill, when it came over from the Senate in John Boehner's book, he talks about Mark Meadows walking in, and this was Steve Bannon. It's classic Boehner, who, by the way, was best friends with George Miller. They were a comedy routine. He talks about, he's Speaker Boehner, and he goes in and he is pleading with Boehner not to bring the bill to the floor because they don't want to be on record voting for it, against it or for it. And at some point, according to Boehner, he broke down and got on his knees and begged him and started crying. Well, that's sort of when Boehner said, according to his book, he's like, that's enough. I'm not dealing with this anymore. So that was Steve Bannon. And there's a book called Unguided Gate. This is like a book club. And he talks about, I can't remember, it was like late 1800s, where we started to do serious immigration laws. It was basically an open border before that. And it was directed at Eastern Europeans and Italians, Catholics and Jews in particular. So this whole story, and the unguarded gate is, what do we do about this? So we've just had this battle in this country where this amazing ideal, the Statue of Liberty, will take anybody. And if you play by the rules, you can do great. And that's still true. I had a Capitol Police officer last week in the rotunda at Carter's thing, and she saw me coming. She opened the thing, and I said, thanks. Where are you from? And she said, Poland. That makes me cry. I got to go find her. She's been here for 10 years. And I said, that's awesome. I want to know more about it. She said, I just want to tell you, Congressman, this is the greatest country in the world. She's from Poland. Now, that's not to say we can let everybody in, particularly because of their background. And there aren't open borders. We have to be more effective. So we just got to have to keep fighting on it. But the thing that, the last part of this is just before the presidential, there was another very similar bill. Same thing, bipartisan out of the Senate. It never got a hearing in the Senate because Trump publicly said, I don't want them to ever vote on this. Well, come on, American voters. I mean, it's not about conservative or Republican. When I sit in the House chambers, you look at that dais, get choked up thinking about it. Thank you for sending me. But it has a national anthem under it, a national motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one. That's a hard job to do in a country as diverse and opinionated as this, but that's what we're supposed to be aspiring to, not dividing everybody. And immigration right now is a problem that needs to be fixed for everybody. It's got to be needs-based, first on America's needs, our economy, our demographics, our education system, but we also have to acknowledge our international obligations under treaties we signed for asylum. So we can't break those laws either. Why a country's going to believe in us at all? So, and there's a way to do that too.
All right, our next question is from Patricia from Pleasant Hill, who asks, what media sources can we trust? I'm worried that Trump will cut funding to PBS.
Oh my God, PBS. Judy Woodruff. That was my best, well, one of my best moments in Congress. Being interviewed on national TV on January 6th. How many people know who Lisa Desjardins are? I love this crowd. The first time I saw her, I walked up to her. You know, most people get intimidated by famous people or wealthy people in sports. I'm like, Lisa? So we have a great friendship now. She's just great. And we've got to protect that and protect that idea that it's balanced. It's not about Democrats or Republicans, is just reporting the news and reporting in a way that's not shallow, that there's some depth to it and you can trust it. So as you probably know, Richard Nixon, again, cut the funding for public TV and radio years ago. So it's been voter supported. So I would suggest you to join KQED.
All right, boss, we have time for 2 more questions. Our next comes from Katha from Walnut Creek. This was submitted ahead of time.
Oh, could it be that, Katha?
I think it might be.
Oh, God.
What?
Wait, you're rigging this thing. No, go ahead. I'm only kidding, Katha. Don't hurt me. We all know who Katha is.
What is the California delegation's plan to fight the Trump administration plans for punishing California? For example, threatening to withhold federal disaster aid. Are you working with AG Bonta and Governor Newsom? What are the most dangerous proposals we will be facing?
Everything. I mean, he's targeting us. Look at Pacific Palisades. I have a friend who used to tend bar for me, got very wealthy as an attorney down there. He showed me a video. His house was right on the cliff. And this was where the front door was. And you can hear his voice cracking. This is where, and there's the Pacific Ocean. And on either side of the houses were fine. And these aren't mansions, but they're expensive houses. For him to suggest that firefighters did nothing to stop it, it's just, so we're going to have to fight like hell again in court. And personal note, Karen Bass is one of the best human beings I've ever met. Actually, she used to come to the district when we were in the legislature frequently because her significant others was a Walnut Creek resident. I don't think they're a partnership anymore, but anyways, it's awful. He's going to target California, but we're going to have to fight back. And we're going to have to, on that, Louisiana's going to need, it was 3 months ago, we voted on a supplemental, it was bipartisan, to help the Gulf Coast and North Carolina because of their national tragedies. You can't do this. Come on. These are people, we're Americans, right?
All right, our final question, I believe this name is VK from Walnut Creek, asks, so many awful things are happening at once. So what can a citizen do? Where should focus go?
That's a great question. You got to get up every day and pay attention. What was that line Kennedy said at the Brandenburg Gate about Berlin? Well, right now it's about, I'm an American. So he said the proudest boast in the ancient world was, I am a citizen of Rome. And then Ich ein Berliner. Right now we are citizens of the United States of America. And we have a generational responsibility to be engaged. So you got to read, you got to pay attention to all of us. If you question us, believe me, I've been wrong many times. That's okay, but you have to be engaged. And you have to think of ways to support things you believe in, whether it's in the community, not political either, nonprofits that do good work, hold them accountable and do the right thing, but you got to be engaged. Frederick Douglass, his home, the great park over in Anacostia. Anybody ever been there? Oh, it's remarkable. Lincoln had made him the marshal of the District of Columbia, which was quite something at the time. So there's a story when you walk up to the house, so it's now a national park. He would walk home, and the story about, I'm getting the quote here. He walks up the hill, and there's a young African-American boy sitting there. He goes, Douglas said, son, what are you doing here? He goes, I've been waiting for you all day, Mr. Douglas. I'm a young man. I'm going to start my life. I'm told you're very wise. I should talk to you. What should I do with my life? And he says, agitate, agitate, agitate. Now, in the tenor of the times, you got to realize agitate doesn't mean attacking law enforcement officers. Agitate means questioning authority, including myself. That's what America's about. And then holding us accountable. So that would be my suggestion. Can we have a round of applause for our wonderful staff? We didn't do this deliberately. Will you want to tell everybody what town you grew up in?
I grew up in Walnut Creek.
All right. That's as far as I'll go. And Janessa over here is our district director. So thank you all for coming. Sorry, you look like I was going to really put you.
No, I love it.